Topic of 20th century military tactics and weapons and how they advanced throughout the 20th century. And I chose this topic because all United States warfare is pretty interesting to me and how they've changed over the years. And I chose the 20th century because I'm more interested in modern warfare than ancient warfare. I researched through credible websites such as .nets, EDUs, and .govs. It was kind of hard to research this topic because it was kind of a general, it showed general developments from war to war instead of detail on certain weapons and how they use different tactics because of each things. And then, as I said before, I chose the topic of weapons and military tactics, how they changed over the 20th century, and I went from each war in the 20th century, and the weapons were advanced to meet enemy advancements in warfare too. And then World War I, it was the first major war with innovations in weapons and tactics, and it was the first use of gas, partially because they used trench warfare, and it was hard to attack enemies because basically trench warfare was when they would just run over the top into no man's land, and there was mines, tripwires, and then obviously they had the machine gun then, and it was basically going over the top was just suicide basically, and that caused for a stalemate in the war. And trenches often had diseases from bodily fluids, and it's called trench foot, I think they got. And U-boats or submarines, as we've talked about in class, were used during World War I, and that's why the United States joined the war, is because Lusitania was sunk by German U-boats, and the Lusitania was a British ship. And then World War II, it was very much an air war where they used tactics of blitzkrieg, which is a German tactic where they bombed many cities throughout Europe, especially London. And the Germans created guided rockets, and that was the first form of guided rockets in warfare. And then the Manhattan Project played a key role in this war. It was the development of the atomic bomb. Scientists really put their expertise into advancing war, and they in turn created the atomic bomb, like I said, and that's how the World War II ended. Harry Truman dropped the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This nuclear warfare eventually resulted in the Cold War. It was a nuclear arms race who could create the first nuclear weapons, and there's a thing called mutual assured destruction, which means basically if you launch a nuclear missile to one country, they're going to retaliate in return, and basically nothing's beneficial for you because it kills a bunch of people and destroys countries. And then the conventional forces in Europe was the way the war and the Cold War was finally settled. The Korean War, there was limited advancements in weapons because since World War II there wasn't any violent wars, and they used World War II weapons and they had poor tactics because they were outdated, and they had major improvements in aircrafts and helicopters. It was an artillery war because radar came into play in the Korean War, and they could find the enemy's coordinates and drop bombs on them and stuff. And then there's a quote, it says, "Failure of leadership and intelligence and preparation," that showed how the United States wasn't prepared for this war due to outdated tactics. And then Vietnam was a war to stop communism, or to stop the spread of it. And World War II weapons were used, but they were improved World War II weapons. The tactics were still outdated by the U.S. They did head-on attacks like they did in previous wars, while the Vietnamese used guerrilla warfare, which is hit-and-run attacks, which took the United States by surprise. Napalm, or Agent Orange, was used quite a bit in this war, and it was basically a bomb that was filled with a bunch of toxic chemicals and dropped on the enemy, and it caused fires and burned the landscape, and then released those toxins in the air. And You can see from this picture, here's a bunch of Vietnamese children like getting burned basically by the napalm. And the soldiers in Vietnam got a bad rap because there's like pictures of them like acting like they don't care about their like safety and stuff. And then lastly, the Gulf War. It was the first major technical war, like technology smart. And this is the F-117 stealth bomber. This was created in this war, and it was undetectable by radar and made sneak attacks easily. And the UAV and radar was used during this war. They could track enemy movements, so they could find them easy. And the tactics was technology and unmanned aircrafts. That's my presentation.